The envelope. The envelope was cream, thick with weight, and sealed with dark green wax bearing the Hart family crest, a hound rampant above a laurel branch, pressed deep by an old silver signet. Daniel Price held it with both hands, not ceremonially, but with the kind of care one reserved for things that could not be unbroken. He stepped through the wide doors of the reception hall as though walking into a courtroom, eyes already fixed on the woman at the top of the staircase. Claire Mallory stood poised beside the head table, her smile calibrated to the occasion. She was wearing pale blue silk, the color of a spring sky that promised no rain, and her gaze swept the room with a hostess's efficiency, locating each person not by affection, but by function. She saw the envelope the moment Daniel entered. Her smile didn't falter, but it paused, a flicker, a breath, and then resumed with greater wattage, turned to a nearby guest with a laugh, and leaned in to adjust the boutonniere on James Holloway's lapel. Michael Hart, seated 3 tables back and half shielded by a stone pillar wrapped in white roses, watched it all with the studied detachment of a man who had long since learned the value of silence. His seat had been reserved. A small ivory card with his name in gold script had been tucked neatly beneath his wine glass, but not prominently placed. He had arrived early, not out of eagerness, but to avoid the scrutiny of late entry, and had chosen the chair with its back to the fire exit and its view partially obscured by floral arrangements. From here, he could see without being seen, just the way Claire liked it. Lucy had insisted he come. "It's just one afternoon, Dad. Claire's been planning this for months, and James is good to her. He really is." Her voice had softened then, the way it did when she was trying not to take sides. It would mean something, you being there. So he came. He wore the navy suit she'd bought him for her graduation and the tie he hadn't worn since Edward Hart's funeral. He brought no companion, accepted no wine, and kept his hands folded in his lap while the speeches began. The hall was a converted manor house, polished and symmetrical, with parquet floors that gleamed under the chandeliers and windows dressed in heavy cream damask. The head table was arranged on a shallow dais beneath the grand staircase, where Claire now stood with the kind of casual command usually reserved for politicians and actresses. She had always been brilliant at entrances. Even now, as Daniel approached with measured steps, she did not descend to meet him. She allowed the solicitor to climb toward her, one stair at a time, as though ascending to a throne. Michael noted the change in the room's temperature. Conversations thinned, forks stilled. Claire extended a hand, not quite palm up, not quite gracious, and Daniel, ever the professional, placed the envelope into it with a slight bow. There was no announcement, no bell rung, no microphone tapped. Just Claire, standing at the crest of the stairs, holding an envelope she had not expected, but clearly recognized. The wax seal had not broken. The crest, Edward's crest, was unmistakable, and Claire, true to form, turned slightly toward the room and said, "It seems we've been left a small surprise." Laughter, polite and shallow, rippled through the crowd. James, seated beside the wedding cake, gave a quick shrug and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His signet ring, a thick gold band engraved with his initials, caught the light as he adjusted his cuff. Claire, already slipping a manicured finger beneath the flap, added lightly, "Edward always did have a sense of occasion." Michael's gaze sharpened. She hadn't even sat down. Claire had a habit, one he'd watched for years, of opening mail as a performance. She claimed it was efficiency, but really it was control. She would stand in the foyer with a stack of post, flipping through it while guests waited to be shown in, offering commentary on bills, invitations, and bank notices as though they were gossip columns. She opened letters like a surgeon, clean, decisive, with no unnecessary damage. The seal cracked. Daniel did not move. He remained one step below her, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Michael noted the faint wear on the edge of the satchel he'd carried. Not a briefcase, but a soft leather shoulder bag, the kind that didn't rattle or declare itself, the kind a man used when he didn't want to be overheard. Claire unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her eyes scanned the top few lines, and her expression did not change, but she didn't speak immediately either. Silence spread like ink in water. Lucy, seated near the cake, with 2 of Claire's friends from her charity board, turned toward her father with a question in her eyes. Michael didn't look at her. He was watching Claire. From the corner of the room, a waiter shifted his weight and hesitated with a tray of champagne flutes. The string quartet trailed off mid-phrase. Even the children at the far end of the hall, caught in the sugar high of wedding cake and parental inattention, paused their games. Claire cleared her throat. Michael closed his eyes, just for a moment. The sound, that small, deliberate clearing, was like a gavel. And then she began to read. But to understand how we got here, to this room, this staircase, this envelope folded in hands that had once worn Edward Hart's wedding ring, we must begin with the man who wrote it, with a trust drafted not out of malice, but precision, with a family that prided itself on appearances, and with a silence that had lasted far too long. The kettle clicked off with a soft metallic pop, and Michael stood motionless in his kitchen, one hand on the edge of the counter, the other still holding Lucy's RSVP card. The handwriting on the envelope had been careful. Hers always was when she thought it mattered. She'd used a fountain pen, navy ink, and the loop of the Y and heart on the return address had a tiny heart where the tail should have ended, an old habit from school days. He turned the card over again, as if some new reading might present itself in the curves of her script. Claire had RSVP'd for them both, naturally, but Lucy had sent her own card too, addressed only to him, slipped between the pages of a book she'd returned last month. "Looking forward to seeing you there, Dad. Let's sit near the cake." A small drawing of a tiered cake, lopsided and cheerful, had been added beneath her name. He folded the card slowly, placing it on the table beside his mug. The kitchen was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and the light through the blinds was gray with late winter indecision. The house always felt smaller in February. He looked at the clock without reading the time. His eyes drifted to the drawer beneath the phone, where the original envelope still sat. Not the one Claire had opened, but the one Daniel Price had handed him 2 months earlier, sealed and marked with a clause number in Edward's handwriting. Daniel had said nothing at the time, just slid the envelope across the desk in his office, the way one might hand over a menu. "You're named as a conditional informant, not a beneficiary," he'd said, with that clipped, neutral tone Michael had always associated with courtrooms and inheritance. Michael had left the office with it in his coat pocket, and for weeks he'd done nothing. He'd read the clause. He'd read it again. He'd memorized the wording. But he hadn't called. Not at first. It had taken another letter, this one from Claire, sent to Lucy and copied to Michael, about the revised seating plan for the reception. Claire had thanked him for understanding the optics, and noted in the same paragraph that he'd be seated comfortably near the musicians, which was her polished way of saying, just far enough from the head table to be visible, but not included. He remembered the line exactly. "It's better this way, darling. You know how people talk." That night, he'd gone into the study, Edward's study. The room hadn't changed much since the funeral. Claire had redecorated the main house, of course. New wallpaper, softer bulbs, a rug that cost more than Michael's car. But the study had remained untouched, perhaps out of respect, or perhaps because she never went in there. It had always been Edward's room, in the way that some spaces remain male even after the man who shaped them is gone. The old desk still bore faint rings from whiskey glasses, and the chair creaked in the same rhythm when Michael sat. The only light came from a green-shaded lamp near the ledger shelf. Michael had run his fingers along the spines of the book's trust law, property codes, a few volumes of poetry that had never been read, and finally stopped at the old filing cabinet. The top drawer stuck a little. Inside were the trust documents. Edward had been meticulous. There were cross-references, margin notes, even a small color-coded index. And there, in pale blue ink, the clause, a conditional trigger set to activate upon a specific convergence Claire's remarriage, the sale of the Hart family silver, and the redirection of certain income streams through a shell company Michael had once flagged, years ago, and been ignored for doing so. It had taken him 20 minutes to confirm all 3 conditions had been met. He hadn't confronted Claire then. He hadn't even called Daniel. He'd gone home, made tea, and watched the steam curl from the mug like smoke from something just starting to catch fire. The call came 4 days later. He'd waited until dusk, as if the half-light might soften the choice. Daniel had answered on the second ring, his voice as dry and careful as ever. "Michael," he said with no inflection, "I've read the clause." There was a pause, but not a long one. "I assumed you would. I want to understand the delivery options." Daniel exhaled quietly, the sound clipped by the phone line. It can be handed in private, read in private, or, if the clause's full conditions are met and not disputed, it can be read at a public gathering involving all primary family stakeholders. The clause allows for discretion. Michael leaned against the counter. But it doesn't require it. No, it leaves that decision to the designated informant. You. He let that word settle. Michael, who had never once in his life sought the spotlight, who had written his own father's eulogy in the margins of a newspaper and spoken it from the side of the lectern, was now the fulcrum on which public and private would pivot. "She'll know it was me," he said. Daniel didn't argue. "And Lucy?" Michael stopped. "It'll touch her." "Yes," Daniel said, his voice lower now. "I won't pretend otherwise. There's no version of this that doesn't bruise." Michael closed his eyes. "What would you do?" "I'm not a heart," Daniel replied. "And I'm not a father." Silence stretched. "There's no legal requirement to act," Daniel added. "But the clause was written for a reason. Edward was precise," Michael finished. "Yes, and deliberate." Michael nodded, though Daniel couldn't see him. "That's all I needed." "I'll be in touch if you proceed," Daniel said. "And Michael, choose your moment carefully. Once read, it cannot be withdrawn." The line went dead with a soft click. That night, Michael sat at his kitchen table long after the house had darkened. He didn't turn on the overhead light, just the lamp above the sink, casting a yellow arc across the table and his hands. He took the envelope from the drawer and placed it in the center of the table. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew every word. He sat back, staring at the grain of the wood. Claire's voice echoed in his memory. Not angry, not even cruel, just polished. Michael's not a numbers man. He's good with people, though, and very steady. He'd laughed at the time, smiled, nodded, let it pass. He'd let so much pass. Lucy's drawing was still on the RSVP card beside him, the cake, the little heart, his name written with care. Michael sat alone in the kitchen. Old self-forgiving, deferential died when he saw Claire's name on the asset transfer forms 3 years ago and said nothing. No more patient silence. No more watching the machinery grind forward while Lucy smiled from the sidelines. Only one question now. Not if Claire paid, but how completely. Something inside broke, but broken things made sharper edges. He opened his laptop, created a folder, cross-referenced the trust clause with the event date and guest list. Timing mattered. Witnesses mattered. Outside, rain ticked softly against the window pane. The man who would have let it go was gone. What remained was colder, sharper, certain. The applause had just begun to die down when Daniel Price stepped forward from the periphery of the hall, his navy suit untouched by the dust and drink that had begun to settle into the corners of the evening. He moved with the kind of quiet that drew attention by its very refusal to demand it. At the head table, Claire's laughter fluttered like bunting, still charming, still effortless, as she leaned toward the woman beside her to make some quip about the floral arrangements. Michael caught Daniel's eye across the room. The solicitor paused briefly beside him, his voice low. "There's still time," he said. "I can deliver it privately. She could open it later, or not at all." Michael looked at him for a moment, then glanced toward the table. Lucy was seated between Claire and James, her cheeks flushed with the glow of toasts and photographs, and too many smiling relatives. She looked happy, or at least as close to it as Michael had seen her since the engagement was announced. He thought of what she'd said earlier, just before the ceremony, when she found him adjusting his tie in the mirror of the side room. "Please don't make today about her. Just once, Dad. Let her have it." He'd nodded then, said nothing, smiled, that same old practice smile that had kept peace for so many years. Now, he exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "Do it here. Do it now." Daniel gave a single, almost imperceptible nod and walked toward the stage. The master of ceremonies had just begun to call for attention when Daniel stepped up beside him, murmured something, and was handed the microphone. The shift was subtle. Claire's smile faltered just briefly as she caught Daniel's figure at the edge of her vision. Her posture straightened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice crisp. "Apologies for the interruption. I've been asked to deliver a legal notice as dictated by the terms of a private trust. Per the instructions of the late Edward Hart, and pursuant to a conditional clause therein, I am required to deliver this envelope. He held it up, wax seal catching the light. To Claire Mallory, in person, and in the presence of witnesses. He turned and stepped down from the dais, walking the short distance to the head table. A hush had settled over the room, the kind that follows the wrong kind of toast. Claire stood slowly, her expression composed but questioning. "What is this?" she asked, voice light, amused even. "A performance piece?" Daniel extended the envelope. "I am not at liberty to summarize its contents. You are required to read the enclosed notice aloud." Claire blinked, laughed again, brittle at the edges. "Edward's idea of a joke, is it?" Daniel didn't answer. Claire glanced at James, who was watching with a kind of stillness that unsettled. "Well," she said, breaking the seal with a manicured finger, "let's see what theater we're meant to endure." She unfolded the paper. Her eyes skimmed the first lines, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then her gaze flicked to Daniel's, and something sharp passed between them. When she began reading, her voice had lost none of its polish, but it carried a new tension, like glass held just a little too tight. "To Ms. Claire Mallory," she read, "this notice serves as formal acknowledgement of the conditional clause enacted under the Hart Family Trust. Clause 12, subsection B, pertaining to misappropriation of funds designated for charitable disbursement and personal gain between the years 2020 and 2023. There was a rustle of discomfort in the room. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. Claire's eyes moved faster now, her voice continuing, firmer, cooler. Per the evidence documented in the Trust's appendix, including asset transfer records, communications, and trustee correspondence, the clause is enacted due to the diversion of funds originally earmarked for the Hart Legacy Fellowship and the Holloway Conservation Initiative. James's head turned sharply. Lucy's smile had vanished. Claire paused. Her fingers tightened on the page. "In accordance with the stipulations of the Trust," she read more slowly, "all disbursements to the named party are hereby suspended pending full review. Access to associated accounts is frozen as of the date and time of this notice." The silence was absolute. Even the band had stopped tuning. Claire looked up, scanning the room as if trying to reset the temperature through sheer will. "Well," she said, folding the paper with deliberate calm, "that was certainly theatrical." James stood. He didn't speak. He reached into his jacket pocket, removed the gold signet ring he had worn on his right hand since Oxford, and placed it gently on the linen beside his untouched glass of champagne. "James," Claire's voice cracked just slightly. He looked at her, then to Daniel. "I'd like to speak with you. Privately." Daniel gave a short nod. They stepped away together, toward the corridor behind the bandstand. Claire remained standing. Her gaze swept the room, landing finally on Michael. She stared at him for a long moment, then spoke, not loudly but with enough clarity to carry. "Was this you?" Michael stood slowly. He didn't look away. "Yes," he said. "I timed it. I chose to be here." Gasps, soft but unmistakable, rippled through the tables. Claire's expression didn't move at first. Then, in the smallest twitch of her mouth, something cracked. "You planned this," she said. "You let her invite you, sit you at our table, smile through speeches, just to do this here?" Michael's voice was steady. "I wanted witnesses. You always preferred an audience." Claire laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You self-righteous bastard." Lucy stood abruptly, napkin clutched in her hand. "Dad, what is this?" she said, voice breaking. "What are you doing?" Michael turned to her. "I'm sorry, Lucy, but this was never about the wedding." "Yes, it is," she said. "It's my wedding. You've humiliated her." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "She humiliated herself," he said quietly. "I just gave the room a clear view." Claire's voice cut in, lower now, venomous. "You waited 3 years to do this. You could have come to me. You could have handled it quietly." "I did," he said. "I came to you the day I found the transfers. You told me I'd misunderstood, that I wasn't a numbers man." Claire's face drained of color. "I smiled," Michael went on. "I let it pass, like I let so many things pass, but Edward didn't. He left a clause. And you triggered it." Claire's breath caught. "You knew for 3 years?" Michael nodded. "And I watched. Every gala, every board meeting, Every time you use Lucy's name to soften your image, I watched. Claire looked away toward the far end of the room, where phones were already being checked, heads bowed together in hurried whispers. Every conversation, she said, barely audible. Every dinner. You were already planning this? Michael's voice was low. Every smile, every toast. I was 3 steps ahead. James re-entered then, his expression unreadable. He walked to the head table, collected his ring from the cloth, and placed it in Daniel's hand. I'll be filing formal notice, he said quietly. The engagement is off. Claire's mouth opened. No sound came. Lucy stared at them all, as if trying to assemble the pieces into something recognizable. Then she turned and walked away, skirts swishing, heels striking too loud against the parquet. Claire watched her go, then turned back to Michael. You've destroyed her trust, she said. Michael's reply was quiet. No, you did. The guests began to rise, some murmuring apologies, others pretending to check their coats or phones. The slow withdrawal had begun. Claire remained standing, alone at the head table, framed by the towering windows and the first whisper of winter outside. Her hands were trembling now, just slightly, enough that the folded paper in her grasp fluttered. Michael stood beneath the high beams, among the departing guests, and watched as the woman who had once rewritten his life with charm and calculation found herself exposed by the very audience she had spent years curating. The silence didn't roar. It receded, like a tide pulling back from something broken. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The damage was done. The room had seen. The edges had cut clean. The next morning, frost clung to the windscreen of Michael's car like a thin film of old breath. He scraped it in silence, the plastic edge of the scraper rasping across glass, each pass exposing a little more of the world. A brittle sun edged over the rooftops as he pulled into the solicitor's car park, the lines on the tarmac still glistening from the early cold. Inside, Daniel Price's office smelt faintly of old paper and something more sterile toner, perhaps. The carpet was tea-stained and precise, like everything else Daniel touched. He didn't offer coffee, only a folder, already open, with documents clipped and annotated in his fastidious hand. The clause is now active, Daniel said, voice clipped as ever. As of 9 this morning, the bank has been instructed to restrict access to the discretionary accounts. They'll allow limited personal withdrawals for 30 days, pending audit. Michael nodded, not looking up. The pages made a soft shuffle as he turned them. They'll contest it, he said. Daniel gave a small, precise nod. They may attempt to, but Edward anticipated that. The audit trail is thorough. Misappropriations from the family trust, dating back 8 years, including the property transfers. A long pause settled between them. Michael ran a thumb along the margin of one page, the edge catching faintly on a paperclip. Claire's solicitor called at 7, Daniel added. Requested a private meeting. I declined. Michael didn't ask why. Daniel's restraint was its own form of loyalty. By midday, the first murmurs had surfaced. A florist rang the venue to clarify whether the standing order for the Winter Charity Gala should be held or canceled. The venue manager, an over-earnest man with a clipboard and a nervous smile, had already received 3 similar calls. He left a message on Claire's assistant's phone. Just checking, are we proceeding with the menu tasting next week? He didn't get a reply. At 3, a boutique jeweler in town, one of the old guard establishments with a mahogany counter and a bell that chimed politely, received a quiet instruction to pause work on a custom piece. The client had not confirmed the inscription. James Holloway, for his part, disappeared with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the exit. His profile photo vanished from the engagement announcement within hours. By the following day, his office sent a notice to the Chronicle, requesting a correction to the society pages. Mr. Holloway is no longer engaged to Ms. Mallory. No further comment. Claire posted nothing. That silence, more than any statement, ignited the speculation. The town did not gossip loudly. It withdrew, softly like a hand being pulled from a glove. At the cafe near the green, the one with the mismatched chairs and the chalkboard menus, Michael sat alone 2 days later, stirring tea he didn't particularly want. A woman at the next table glanced over once, then again. She didn't say anything, but her friend leaned in and whispered something, eyes flicking toward him. He recognized neither of them. That was the point. Recognition had become selective. His phone buzzed once, a text from Claire. You have no idea what you've done. You've torn it all down. For what? He stared at the message for a long moment, then locked the screen and slid the phone face down across the table. In the window's reflection, he caught sight of himself, lined, tired, but steady. The sort of man who could be mistaken for harmless until he wasn't. He lifted the cup and drank. By the end of the week, the local charity committee, a group Claire had chaired for nearly 6 years, announced a temporary restructuring. An email, curt and unsigned, circulated quietly. Given recent developments, the board has decided to postpone the annual review. We thank Ms. Mallory for her past contributions. Michael read it in his study, the one room in the house untouched by time. It still smelt faintly of pipe smoke and the faint cedar of the old desk that had once been Edward's. He closed the email and sat back. The phone rang once that evening, Daniel again. "She's retained new counsel," he said. "They're pushing for a closed arbitration, but the clause is clear. The freeze holds." Michael didn't respond immediately. He looked at the lamp on the desk, the soft light pooling in a quiet circle. "And Lucy?" he asked finally. A longer pause. "She hasn't contacted me," Daniel said, "nor, I believe, anyone professionally involved." Michael nodded once, though Daniel couldn't see it. After they hung up, he sat alone for a long while. Somewhere in the house, a pipe clinked in the wall. The heating had come on again. 3 days later, he passed Lucy in town. She didn't see him at first. She was stepping out of the bakery, scarf wrapped high, and her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses that felt too performative for a gray morning. She laughed at something the woman beside her said, then stopped. Her gaze caught him across the narrow street. For a moment, neither moved. Then she turned, murmured something, and walked briskly in the opposite direction. Michael didn't follow. He stood still, letting the cold settle into his coat. At the bank, the clerk was polite but firm. "I'm afraid that account is under review, Miss Mallory. You may use the personal card for basic purchases, but any transfers or large withdrawals will need to go through compliance." Claire's smile was brittle. "I am the trustee." The clerk glanced at the screen. "You were, ma'am. The terms have shifted under the conditional clause. Our legal team can provide the full wording." She took the printout with a hand that didn't tremble, but her knuckles were white. Outside, in the car, she sat for a long time, the engine idling, the fan whispering against the glass. Her phone buzzed once, an email from the private school's bursar. "We'd be grateful to confirm the funding arrangement for next term. As per our agreement, the advance installment is due by the end of the month." Claire's reply was composed. "There is a temporary delay due to administrative restructuring. Payment will be made." She didn't press send. Instead, she opened the gallery on her phone, scrolled past photographs, dinners, fundraisers, Lucy in her sixth form uniform, the engagement party. A picture of her and Michael surfaced. From years ago, caught in the blur of an old phone camera. She looked perfect. He looked like he was already halfway gone. She closed the app. Back in his own kitchen, Michael rinsed a mug and placed it carefully on the rack. The silence in the house had begun to feel structural, like something built into the walls. Not emptiness exactly, just the absence of noise he used to tune out. He opened his phone again, scrolled to the text from Claire, then deleted it. There was no reply to give. The damage was still unfolding. It would for some time. He had set the wheel turning. Now it moved on its own. Winter parking lot. The supermarket car park was half empty, hemmed in by low hedges and slick with the kind of winter damp that seeps into your shoes no matter how quickly you walk. Michael pulled into a space near the far end, where the tarmac sloped slightly and the shopping trolleys clattered in a metal bay nearby. He turned off the engine but didn't move, watching the breath bloom faintly on the inside of the windscreen. The gray light made everything look flat sky, cars, the rows of brick-fronted shops beyond. Claire arrived 3 minutes later. He'd known she would. Her messages had been clipped, practical. 4 p.m., Sainsbury's car park. I'll park near the pharmacy side. No greeting, no sign-off. But they both understood what this was. She stepped out of the car without her usual heels, wearing plain flats and a wool coat cinched too tightly at the waist. Her hair was scraped back, face bare but still composed. She didn't walk like someone on a stage anymore. Just a woman coming to meet a man she used to know, in a car park that smelled faintly of exhaust and wet trolley handles. Michael got out and shut his door softly. They met halfway by a crooked lamppost that flickered once and steadied. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "You said 4. I assumed you meant it." Claire gave a small, tired laugh. Still precise. Michael didn't answer. He waited. She folded her arms, more to contain herself than against the cold. "I thought about calling Lucy, asking her to come too, but she wouldn't have, not after the way you left the reception." "I didn't leave," he said. "Everyone else did." A pause. Claire looked away toward the pharmacy window, where a poster for hay fever tablets flapped weakly against the glass. "You timed it," she said finally. "The envelope, the clause, the seating plan, the wax seal, all of it." "Yes." She turned back. "So it wasn't just Edward?" "No," Michael said. "It was me. I found the clause 3 months ago. Daniel confirmed it. I waited. Waited for the wedding. It was the one place you couldn't control the audience." Her mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. "You always hated those parties." "I tolerated them," Michael said. "For Lucy, for appearances. You were good at them." Claire's arms dropped to her sides. "You know, I never expected Edward to leave it like that. I thought if he wanted to punish me, he'd do it with silence, not paperwork." "He did both." She winced just slightly. "And you? What did you want?" Michael looked at her. The woman who had once stood beside him in photographs, always angled just so, always with a smile polished for print. "I wanted the lies to stop being useful, that's all." Claire exhaled, white breath curling into the air. "Lucy's furious. She won't answer my calls. She won't answer yours either, I hear." "No." "She'll come round," Claire said too quickly. "Perhaps." They stood in silence as a boy in a red hoodie jogged past with a basket of shopping. Somewhere, a car alarm hiccuped and stopped. "You humiliated me," she said eventually, voice low. "Deliberately. In front of people I've worked with for years. Friends, James." Michael nodded once. "You used Edward's accounts to fund your image. The clause specified misuse of legacy funds. You knew that was a risk. I managed them. I didn't steal. You used them for private gain. You called it stewardship." Claire's chin lifted, but her voice was quieter now. "You could have handled it privately, brought it to me. We could have managed it." "I did manage it," Michael said. "Just not the way you wanted." Another silence, this one longer. Claire stepped back slightly, her breath catching as though she'd remembered something too late. "Do you think Lucy will forgive either of us?" He didn't answer for a while. When he did, his voice was dry. "Children forgive all sorts of things, but not quickly, and not always." Claire nodded, her eyes flicking downward. "She told me she didn't know who to believe. She shouldn't have to choose." "Well," she said, voice flat, "you made that impossible." Michael looked past her, at the rows of cars, the dull red of a frozen trolley coin jammed into a chain. "She'll make her own decisions. That's what this was always meant to be about. Truth, not control." Claire blinked. "You think this was about truth? You think it wasn't?" She didn't reply. A gust of wind lifted the hem of her coat. She didn't adjust it, just stood there, arms hanging loose, as if some tension had finally drained out and left her hollow. "I'm not sorry," Michael said quietly. "I know. But I regret it." She looked at him then, properly. "So do I." A delivery van rumbled past, its tires hissing on wet tarmac. Claire glanced at her car. "I should go." Michael nodded. "I won't contact you again. Unless Lucy asks me to." She hesitated. "And if she doesn't?" "Then she doesn't." Claire looked down at her hands, bare in the cold. Her nails were still manicured, but chipped at the edges. "You always hated the theater of things," she said. "Now you've staged one yourself. I didn't enjoy it, but you rehearsed it." Michael didn't deny it. She stepped back. "Goodbye, Michael." "Goodbye." Claire walked to her car without turning again. The door closed with a muted thunk, and the engine started after a pause. She pulled out carefully, signaling despite the empty lane, and was gone before the lamppost flickered again. Michael stood for a moment longer. Then he walked back to his own car, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The interior smelled faintly of old coffee and cold fabric. He placed his hands on the steering wheel and stared out through the windscreen, where the gray light was beginning to fade into something softer, almost blue. The silence felt familiar now, not comfortable, but his. He waited until the car park emptied further. Then he turned the key, shifted into gear, and drove out slowly, past the shuttered shops and the pharmacy window, onto the long suburban road, where the lights turned amber just as he approached, and he let them. He had nowhere urgent to be.